you so much, Dakota. You've given us lots of good food for thought, and we're going to keep going now with Jan Jacobs.
I can see. I'm good. Am I close enough to this? Dakota's just a tad bit taller than I am. I'm a sacred Osage woman, and I come from the Osage people to be with you tonight. I'm a member of the Deer Clan, of the Strike X Band, and the great-granddaughter of Clarence and Jenny Gray. This is a picture of my family. This is my grandfather and my grandmother, great-grandmother. And my mother is the youngest, sitting down with her little hands on her knees, kind of like, what am I doing here? And there were 2 more sons to come, and they had lost 3 sons. So these are the people from where I came. These are the people that have given me a sense of who I am today. See if I can remember this, how to do this. There you go. And this is my mother, George Ann Robinson. George Ann Robinson was Wakonse. She was the 5th daughter, and she and her sisters were raised in Osage Territory, Osage County. It originally was Osage Reservation land, and now it is also the county in Oklahoma. So they're one and the same. Osage County and the Osage Reservation are the same. And my mother was born right prior to the discovery or around the time of discovery of oil on the Osage Reservation, which was a very historic time for us. It was known as the Reign of Terror. A lot of murders took place, and because of that, my mom was sent to a boarding school so that during the weekdays she was in a very safe place, because my grandmother had passed away when my mom was only 6, and my grandfather passed away when my mom was 15. And from that, to me, the reason I bring this to you and to tell you about this is because there was a strength that came out of that period of time, and a strength that my mother had because of the things that she had gone through as a child. And even as a grown woman in her 60s, there would be times when we'd be visiting, and she would talk about her mother and father, and I could still hear a shake in her voice, because that's how important they were to her and who she became. Ribbon work, Osage ribbon work. That was my mother's love, aside from family, of course. But in during this reign of terror, our dance kind of subsided. We have a dance called the Inoshka, and it's a dance known as the playground of the eldest son. And we have 3 villages, Pahuska, Osage, and Hominy. And this was our homeland. It became our homeland in 1877 when we were kind of asked to leave Kansas, our reservation in Kansas, and move to Indian Territory. And we were fortunate enough that we were at a period of time when there was a change in the administration. And when it was time for us to move, instead of getting 19 cents an acre for our land, we got $1.25 an acre for our land. And so we were able to purchase our reservation in northeastern Oklahoma from the Cherokees, an area the Cherokees lived on. And that was very important, because not only did we retain the rights to the surface land, but we retained the rights to all the mineral rights of the land. Over time, the land was divided among head right holders, but we retained the mineral rights as a tribe. And because of that, this reign of terror happened, and we got quite wealthy overnight. And there we were referred to as the richest people in the world per capita. So that all of a sudden changes your history. Things happen. You build big houses, you live in nice houses with people that can take care of you, wait on you, serve you. You can buy cars. And it changes a little bit the history of your people. And then with that came a lot of outsiders who wanted this money, and they were trying to marry into Osage families, and then there were murders so that the money would go to the person that had married into the family. And so during this period of time, our dances and our culture was kind of on an ebb and flow. And in the 1950s, 1940s, we started to think about the dance again. The dance had never gone away. We had continued to have those dances, and they were so important to my grandfather. But they had diminished in the number of participants. So my mother and her sisters had been doing some talking, and my mother realized that there were not very many women left that could do Osage ribbon work. And it intrigued her, because as a child, she had watched her own father sit at the sewing machine and sew. So she and her sisters were seamstresses. They had no problem sewing. And that's what came about, a store that they opened called the Red Man Store. And the purpose of that store was to create Osage men and women's clothes for the Iloshka dance, because there were a lot of people that didn't have clothes. They couldn't afford clothes. And so by having a place that people could go to purchase full men's and women's clothes for the dance was highly unusual. And so during that period of time, it was a time that she was learning too about design, about color, about how do I do this ribbon work. So I'm going to kind of go back in time now, because when I think of Osage ribbon work, the very first kind of documented sighting of an Osage, not Osage, but of a ribbon work wedding dress was a Menominee dress in 1802. And these dresses were, and this ribbon work was quite elegant and not something that was just made yesterday. You could tell that the person that made it had become an artisan, had learned the craft of Osage ribbon work. So that tells you that it was prior to 1802. Well, for the Osage, we traded with the French. And we had many French traders on our lands that actually built trading posts, and they became partners in fur trapping with Osages because we were hunters. And then you think about the French Revolution. Well, the French Revolution ended in 1799, and for people in France to own ribbon was a sign of wealth, and you were trying to be better than the next person. And so there was an abundance of ribbon as well. So many things kind of came together for there to be ribbon in Indian country. And it's mostly kind of in the woodlands tribes, and Osages were in the state of Missouri, and so we had this opportunity to get ribbon. And so from that, and to this day forth, ribbon work is so important to Osage people. The ribbon work technique that we use is a cut and fold, and it's very geometrical. This here is an image of a man's suit. This is a suit that my mother made, and it is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. It's a part of their permanent collection. And this was, of course, not the first suit she ever made. You can tell that by this time she was quite a gifted ribbon worker. But ribbon work, to me, when I think back, I think about women that got these long strips of ribbon, and they're like, what do we do with this ribbon? You know, we're not going to put it in our hair. I mean, some place they thought about putting these ribbons together and creating these beautiful designs. So they layered one ribbon on top of another ribbon, and they cut, and they folded, and they stitched. Of course, they didn't have sewing machines, so the stitching had to be very delicate, very even. And what kind of scissors did they have? I mean, I think of the scissors I go and spend a whole lot of money on so that I can make these little fine cuts and folds. And it just amazes me when I think back on that whole process of developing this art form. There are other tribes that do a type of ribbon work too, and there's maybe an overlay where they actually do a cross stitch. We do not do cross stitch. We do fold so that it's a finished edge. And so this technique of cut and fold, geometric design, has developed and continues to be the style we use. There may be a few curves, but we do not do much curvilinear ribbon work. The men's ribbon work is more of what you see here, many ribbons together. What you do is you put those ribbons together and you decide what your design is going to look like, and your first ribbon decides the design. And you make your cuts and folds and you create that first ribbon, and then the second ribbon builds on the first, so that you build to the middle in a geometric design, and then you copy it so it's symmetrical going out. So this here is, as I said, is a man's suit. And you can see it up close just a little bit. This suit here is another one of my mother's, and I like to tell people that for the majority of Osages, our art is in our cedar chest trunks, or it goes around the drum. It doesn't hang on a wall. But fortunately, there are fine pieces that we do have in museums. The Denver Art Museum has some quality pieces of Osage ribbon work. And unfortunately, some of it can't be on display because it's silk ribbon. And silk and wool, the broadcloth that we mount the ribbon work on, they don't like each other. And over time, the silk ribbon disintegrates. And there are pieces at the Art Museum where you can tell what the design was, but the ribbon's totally gone. So you don't get to see it. And so we don't have old examples of ribbon work like you do of pottery or different things. What's in collections, in some ways, is very young. You know, early 1900s, maybe late 1800s. But because of the silk and the wool, sometimes it just doesn't work together. This is a rayon ribbon here. And my mother's choice was Swiss moire. And the reason I speak about my mother so much is because she is the one who taught me to do ribbon work. But we didn't necessarily sit down and say, okay, today's your lesson to learn ribbon work. She'd be doing ribbon work, and she'd say, bring that over here. Let me see you cut that. Let me see you fold that. I often did bead work, the beaded edging, because I was young. And that was something I could accomplish. But I sat around that table with those women, working and talking. And that's through osmosis, I then began to understand the meaning of the work and why it was so important to them that we carry that forward. I have to say today at our dances, instead of having 50 people dancing around the drum, we have hundreds of people, 300, 350 on Friday night dancing around our drum. And you would see all different designs, all different colors of ribbon work. I had the good fortune a few years ago to go to New York to the Met. This is my niece, the one that's she's actually looking up information on her phone. We laugh and say, "Who are you texting?" But she was actually, we were talking about something. She said, "Let me check that out." And the other is my great niece, Jamie Powell, who was doing a project on Osage ribbon work. And Lisa is a fine ribbon worker herself. And so we were looking at this piece and admiring it. And Lisa and I both said, you know, I think the artist that did this blanket also has a piece at the Denver Art Museum. Because as we looked at the technique, we looked at the stitching, we looked at the design, we just felt like it had to be done by the same person. And yet, they don't know who created this blanket. The Denver Art Museum doesn't know who created their blanket. But there's certain similarities there on that ribbon work. This is a view of a woman's wearing blanket. So I would say that people often wonder, you know, do you have rules about your ribbon work? Well, we kind of do, yes. We like geometric, we like symmetry, but where the creativity comes in is the color choices and how you put the design together. Osage have become known for their what we call barbed designs. Now, I don't have an example of something with a barbed design, but the creativity comes to me from the person that is just making the piece. My mom used to say, well, I picked these pieces because they're just you. You know, so I think there's a certain amount of thought that goes into it, and then we'd have some people come in and say, well, my favorite colors are, can we put them together? And you try to figure out a way to make them together, because some really harsh colors don't look as nicely together as others. So it's all a part of that artist and that person that is wanting that piece to kind of guide you and help you. Now today, with the ribbon work, you know, we finish it with a sewing machine. The pieces like you see here, or this one, I can't remember. I think this might have been a treadle sewing machine, but there are also pieces that have hand stitching. And several years ago, I was invited by Nancy Blomberg, who was a curator of the Denver Art Museum Native Arts Department at the time, and asked me if I would be willing to recreate a piece of ribbon work for they were going to put an Osage cradle board on exhibit, and the ribbon work was too deteriorated to display. But they really wanted this type of cradle board with other cradle boards, because others were heavily beaded, and Osage ribbon work is Osage cradle boards aren't. So my niece and I said, what do you think? Should we do it? And it's interesting that the ribbon was blue and pink, because I didn't know what the baby was going to be. So I took that design, measured every piece, and tried to create that design as it was first done. Now, I tell people that it wasn't my design. It didn't belong to me. It belonged to the person that created it. But I had the opportunity to do a new set of ribbon work for that baby board, and it had sewing stitching and it had hand stitching. So I did all the ribbon work, Lisa did all the sewing machine, and then I went back and did the hand stitching. And so that was, you know, a collaborative effort between two people that do ribbon work together, and oftentimes that occurs. That you don't do the whole piece by yourself. You have people that help you with it. This here is a picture of, and unfortunately, this was taken and you can't really see our skirts, but these are my daughters and these are my granddaughters as we're getting ready to dance at the June dances. And as I said before, the ribbon work is key to our dance because it's on our men's clothes and it's on our women's clothes. And Osages don't by nature really powwow a lot. So you might not see, if you go to a powwow, you might not see anyone in this style of dress. But if you go to the Osage dances, every single person is dressed in Osage style, which is, I think, very unique and beautiful. Of course, I might be just a tad bit prejudiced when it comes to Osage clothes. This here is a picture of my nephews and son on their way to the dance. My niece took this just this last summer, and I have to say, this was not a posed picture. They were walking up to the dance. We have 3 bells. First bell tells you you better be starting to get dressed. The third bell tells you all better almost be done, and the second one and the third one says you better be ready to walk up there now because we're going to start the dance. And they started walking up to the arbor, and my nephew, who is the oldest, started walking, and then my son, who has the yellow scarf on, and then my nephew Michael, on the other side of Ben, they're the next 2 oldest. They just kind of started walking, and then the 2 youngest, Ryan and Christopher, in the back. Isn't it funny how sometimes that age thing in Indian families just it's kind of a natural osmosis. They just kind of fell in, and they were on their way. They're going to the dance. So this is one of my favorite pictures, I have to say. You know, we talk about, one of the things that was mentioned is stewardship. Well, I think we definitely have Osage people now that are taking care of ribbon work, that are taking care of the dance, and want to make sure that it continues. And it will continue to evolve because we continue to evolve as people. We don't anymore have any first language speakers. You know, we're second and third language speakers, so even our language is not the same. Our children will have an Osage language, but it won't be the language of my great-grandparents. The dance will change, but yet it will stay the same because the purpose of the dance will not change. We now have some men doing ribbon work, and it's very interesting because they've developed a whole new technique to do ribbon work. They make metal templates of the design they want, and then they lay it on the ribbon, and they use a hot knife. So the hot knife finishes it, so you don't have to cut and fold. You just follow that template, and the ribbon is fused, but it still has to be stitched on the sewing machine. So it's a new way of doing ribbon work. Now, for ribbon workers that forever have cut and folded, it's kind of like, I don't know about that. Yeah, it's too perfect. I do think it's beautiful. I won't say that it's not. But to me, it's almost too perfect. Because I like that sense of that one little diamond might be off just a little, and you might not even notice it till you got up close, but you know that it was made, someone sat there and cut and folded and really worked hard to try to get that point exactly the way it should be. Well, with a template like that, it's going to be, it's going to be. So I guess there's still discussion on that, and I'm not going to go one way or the other, because I am glad that there are people that are still working to create ribbon work so they can go around the drum, because that's the important thing, that people dance and dress and go around the drum. Now, ribbon work in and of itself is an art form, and my mom was quoted as saying, it's to her, it's as beautiful as a melody, a Brahms melody, or a painting by a great artist. To her, they are one and the same. And so, we have to think about that as an art form. That's how I look at it. But over the years, ribbon work has become synonymous to us as Osage people. We use it to identify who we are in the world around us. So this is the Heritage Center in downtown Pawhuska, Oklahoma, which I was just there this weekend. I was able to get these photos. Sunday morning, there's no traffic. I mean, it's a small town, but I don't know if you've ever heard of the Pioneer Woman on the HGT, on the Food Network, but her mercantile is in Pawhuska. So this street is usually busy because there are all kinds of people coming to see the Pioneer Woman and the mercantile. This was a Sunday morning, and I was actually on my way to the cemetery, and I said, I've got to get these photos. So here you see Osage ribbon work. It's letting people know that this is a part of who we are. It's hard to see on this, but above, that border above and the border on the bottom is Osage ribbon work. And this is the sign at our Early Learning Center. And there it is again on the Osage Nation bookmobile. And I just looked today, just out of curiosity, on our website, and there was a picture saying that, just a reminder, the offices, the Osage Nation's offices are closed on Monday, and there was a picture kind of a Osage design, red, white, and blue. So we take an art form that is important to us, and we've made it our own in many ways. So to me, the work itself started all those hundreds of years ago when a woman got a piece of ribbon and looked at that ribbon and thought, what can I create? And out of her creation, today we have the clothes that go around our dance and the images that identify us as Osage people. Thank you.